Hey, what's happening, everyone? Welcome back to the Essential NFL newsletter slash podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Clinton, and yeah, great to be back here. So yeah, I've been offline for a little bit. Life got crazy, and only so much bandwidth to put into this at times. But really excited to have the time and space in my life to get back on the mic and start talking football here ahead of the 2026 NFL season. So real quick, I just want to talk a little bit about what I'm going to be bringing to the podcast and newsletter as a whole moving forward before we jump into these four teams that we're going to be talking about today. Last year's 4-13 teams in a 2026 state of the team episode for those teams. So, real quick on the Essential NFL newsletter itself, the podcast. What I'm looking to do here is really just turn this into I don't know. A, self-made documentary, I guess you would say, but a documentary about my process as I get ready for the upcoming NFL season. So that's looking at all these different teams, putting all this information into a predictive model, and then I'll get in rolling with that. So yeah, along the way, I'll have film breakdown stuff. I'll have just straight football talk. I'll also have episodes where I'm talking analytics and doing some coding, and hey, might even do some sessions where if you want to make your own fantasy football predictions for the upcoming year, I'll show you how you can do that with some different tools. So yeah, hopefully we have some fun here. I know that I will. So yeah, let's jump into it. Right, I haven't talked football in way too long a time, so I've been writing up these teams. If you're interested in the write ups on these four teams, those are available on the Essential NFL Substack under the newsletter. So if you like to read rather than listen, you can go check this information out there. I will be using those write-ups as my notes as I go through the show. So, of course, I think most NFL fans are aware the Las Vegas Raiders did pick first this year, and added Fernando Mendoza. Sorry, I've got that one mixed up in my head. Got to get that right. But I'm going to change it up on this podcast a little bit, and I'm going to go in a different order. I'm going to kick things off with the Tennessee Titans. That's how I wrote these articles, and I think it all just flows a little bit better. So before I get into the Titans, I want to make an overarching statement about these four teams and kind of the state of the league in general. As we go through these four teams, we're going to talk about how every single one of them has an absolutely enormous amount of cap space, going into next year and the year after. And this is a pretty common thing across the NFL right now because the cap is exploding at such a high rate. The projections I've seen indicate that it's going to continue to go up at this rate. For reference, the cap dropped under $200 million during the COVID season when they rolled it back. We're up over $300 million now. So, we're talking about a 5-year period there where the salary caps has exploded. And it's really changed the dynamics of team building because it's so difficult to acquire players on the free agent market that you would really want to get because the vast majority of teams are able to keep the talent they want to keep. There are, of course, exceptions to this, but I think there's just no getting around the fact that it's harder and harder to acquire veteran talent in the NFL right now. That's worth the price that you're going to pay for it. So it's something that you have to consider with all of these teams. That we've got all this money coming off on the books next year, but everybody else is seeing the cap go up as well. So we're going to have all this cash. Who are we going to be able to spend that on? So I think that's an important question for all of these teams as we talk about these bills moving forward. So let's get into it though, and let's talk about the Tennessee Titans. So, as I mentioned, running through state of the team, Titans enter this season with $64 million in projected cap space, $54 in projected cap space for next year. I'm sure they could wiggle around with that, and then they've got $250 million in projected cap space for 2028. All their draft picks are in place for the next 2 seasons, 2027, 2028, and they did streamline things this past week a little bit more with the front office out there in Tennessee, where they had implemented that novel new idea of having a GM who wasn't the GM and a football president in operations who was the GM last year with Chad Brinker and Mike Borgonzi. They blew that up 1 year later because it was too complicated. Don't know who could have foreseen that. And then this past week, Chad Brinker left the organization. So it's Mike Morganzi running things in the front office moving forward for the Titans. Titans bring in a new head coach with Robert Saleh, bring in a new offensive coordinator with another ex-New York head coach, Brian Daboll, joining up. So we got the former Jets head coach, former Giants head coach, neither of whom was particularly successful out there in New York. And then, they're bringing in Gus Bradley as the defensive coordinator here. He'll be working, it'll be Saleh's defense. And then John Fossil catches on as the special teams coordinator. So, looking at this team and the build in general, I think it's fair to say that we're really just working around Cam Ward here, right? And to me, I think that's a pretty good starting point in a lot of ways. I thought Cam Ward as a rookie, showed a lot of what you want to see in terms of just his pure traits. I think that he moves around well. I think that he can be decisive, throwing different concepts. He's got a very flexible arm. He's got good arm strength that he generates with not a whole lot of putting himself into the throw, I guess you could say. I think that he just has pretty easy arm strength. He's not 6'5", 240, so he doesn't throw the ball like those guys. But as far as guys his size, I think Cam Ward throws it about as well as you can. And the thing I would say about Cam Ward in terms of evaluating him is that, and this is, gets to the Titans draft strategy, they have to get the offense better around him. I was reviewing his film down the stretch, and there's just so many reps where, they're trying to run a drop back passing concept, and there isn't anything there. Nobody's open. The routes are all, tightly covered up, and Ward's just kind of moving to his check down, and he doesn't have a lot else to do. There are certainly reps where he is hitting downfield passes, but one of the themes I noted is that a lot of the times when his guys are getting open down the field, it's because the defense just drops the coverage or somebody trips or something like that. It's not like receivers are beating the corner they're playing in phase in their route, and then Cam Ward has a spot to pin it on them within the timing of the route concept. No, it's more like the defense just totally screwed up, and that's why this guy isn't covered here. So and of course the Titans, it was a lot of mid-round draft picks. Calvin Ridley didn't work out at receiver last year, so there wasn't a lot to work with. So all that to say that I don't think that you can definitively say, who Cam Ward is going to be in the NFL just because his opportunities were really limited in the context of last year's offense. But the flip side of that is I think that in those conditions, he showed that he has the tools and the ability to read things out, the conviction to be an NFL quarterback, in my opinion. Now, it's got to be in a better situation. He needs to keep building as a player. But if I were going in and looking to, take over a team, and you were telling me that, your starting point is that Cam Ward will be your quarterback, sign me up. I think you can do a lot of good with Cam Ward pulling the trigger for you. So, around him, it's a lot more question marks, I think. I would let's start with the positive here. I think that the Titans really have a standout player on their hands in left guard Peter Skoronski, the Northwestern product. And Skoronski, it's been a gradual build, I think you could say. And to me, the game where I felt like the light switch really got flipped on was against Kansas City. And in that Chiefs game, I think there were 3 separate reps. There were definitely 2 where the Titans are trying to run the ball to the left, and Chris Jones is lined up over Skoronski, and he just, puts together some teach tape, just stacking and shedding Skoronski. And, just not the best reps that Skoronski is going to have, but he, all of a sudden, I think it was like late third quarter, something flipped in his head, it felt like. And I've seen that happen with other players in evaluation processes before. And, full disclosure, I didn't follow the Titans down the back half of the season every game. So I can't say for sure that this is the moment. But in terms of the games I reviewed, this was the moment. And he just started, manhandling people. And it looked like he was turbocharged on his pulls and just like, I don't know, like a lot of fuck you in him, after that had happened with Chris Jones, and I don't know, but and it continued right into the next game, and it was from the first snap that next game, and I think that with Skoronski, what you're seeing now is a guy who is really mobile. When he gets to his target, he is really physical at the point of attack, and you combine, those movement skills, the ability to get physical when he gets there. And then, he's got decent size. And, to me, down the stretch, the guy that kind of stuck out with the movement ability is Chase Lindstrom or Chris Lindstrom from down with the Atlanta Falcons as a guard who's very mobile, able to get to the second level, do all these pulls. Say Skoronski's a little bit bigger dude than him. It was just a real pleasure watching him down the stretch. Now, the flip side of that is that, this offensive line and Titans offensive infrastructure in general is not elite. We'll see if they do anything to shore up those other 2 interior spots next to Skoronski. But at the moment, we're talking about potentially Austin Schlottman, who is, very much a journeyman. I can't even recall him starting for an extended period of time in my memory. He's slated to be the starting center. They brought in Cordell Volson from the Bengals, who, the Bengals drafted him to try to shore up their interior offensive line. He eventually lost his job there. So hard to be super optimistic about that. And then, at tackle, we know what we're kind of working with Dan Moore, where best case scenario is he plays league average ball. The downside case is that he's a lot worse than he was. And then we'll see. The X factor, I would say, is J.C. Latham, who, he's got physical tools, right? He's a big, strong dude. He's yet to translate it to consistency in the NFL, but there have been a couple other big guys who came out. I'd point to Evan Neal with the New York Giants, who, when I was watching his film, it was just he wasn't generating a lot of power on defenders, right? Which is not a good thing when you're standing 6'8", 340. Like, if you're that body type, like the Trent Brown body type, you better be moving dudes on contact, if you're that big. And with Latham, I've never had a question about that. So I think that it's just refining his game, putting it all together. So, the offensive line could be okay. I don't know that you can expect it to be a ton better given the personnel adjustments, because really all we're relying on is that, Peter Skoronski's taken a step forward. Whether or not they get better play out of the other guys, I think is an open question. Now, on the positive side, there are, a couple more pieces, I guess, are around Cam Ward here. I personally really thought Tony Pollard played great down the stretch last year. I know that Robert Saleh had a quote to that effect that would agree with me. He was coordinating for the 49ers last year, and he mentioned Pollard running for 100 against them and how he looked pretty good. The week before that, he had a couple of really long runs against Cleveland. I think he's really gotten his explosiveness, back to where it was. He looks a lot like the guy in Dallas before he had his injury. So I think that you can be pretty darn excited about having Tony Pollard as your main back moving into the year. Tyjae Spears, solid player as a compliment. It's when you get to the pass catchers that you have to, again, revisit this. Now, hopefully, Carnell Tate, the 4th overall pick, lives up to the hype and the excitement. They need him to. They just don't have an option that you really love as an outside receiver. And if we were to just play this out, 2 steps further, and let's just take the scenario where it doesn't work out with Carnell Tate, all of a sudden we're looking at a passing attack that's anchored by Wan'Dale Robinson as the main receiver. So all of a sudden Brian Daboll's offense in Tennessee looks way too much like it did in New York, right? With Wan'Dale Robinson as the lead receiver. Some parts on the offensive line, but not really a complete unit. Some good options at running back, but just not enough depth at the pass catching group. And so we'll see how that all works out. Again, I think that, if Carnell Tate can get out there and run some, legit receivers as their outside receiver on the ball as the X and win, I think that could do so much to add rhythm to this offense and really take this to the next level. Gunnar Helms slated to be the tight end. Chigo Okonkwo no longer in the building. I don't know how much of a loss that is at this point, based on how they used him last year to the point of the offense getting frustrated. Obviously Chig had big numbers in I guess it was the Kansas City game, but he was just catching a variety of screen passes. I think all 6 of his catches in that game were screens, and he even had more targets on that. And, that's all well and good. I'm glad it worked for them in that game. And if you're actually trying to win games to get into the playoffs or something, hey, use whatever tactics are at your service. But for the Titans and where Cam Ward was, I did not think those were really great reps to build on. So in terms of teaching things, so we'll see. I think that you'd feel a lot better if the Titans could have added like a legit guaranteed playmaker rather than just a highly drafted rookie and Wan'Dale Robinson. But again, there's only so many players out there, so I think this is kind of the best they could do with the circumstances. Flipping it over to the defense here, I think that it's going to be interesting here. The Titans added several players. I like the addition of John Franklin Myers quite a bit. I think he's a really, really good player. Probably was underpaid on his last contract and now maybe overpaid on this contract, but is what it is in free agency. They had Keldrick Falk traded up into the backup into the first round to bring him into the mix. And we'll see from there. I think that there were already some players in place that fit what I kind of think of as a Robert Saleh defense, namely, Jeffrey Simmons as the 3 technique, pretty easy to see him doing what Quinnen Williams was doing for the Jets. And then Cedric Gray at off-ball linebacker. Certainly not a perfect player at this stage in his development, but the things that I'd say stand out about Cedric Gray are that he can run and he'll hit you. And that's how I would largely describe Quincy Williams, bringing up another Williams brother from that Jets defense. So, I think that those two paired together kind of fit that mold pretty well. You got Cody Barden as an inside linebacker as well, who's more the steady piece. I think CJ Mosley at the end of his career with the Jets, where he was paired up with Quincy. So, I think you got a lot going there in terms of the middle as some starting points. Now, where it starts to get dicey is things like, trading for Jermaine Johnson. You give up Devondre Sweat. We'll see what Jermaine Johnson does, but, he's had major injuries. It's hard to say what you're going to get from him. And then, with the corner situation, and bringing in Alante Taylor and Cordell Flott to presumably be your two outside cornerbacks. I just think that's a pretty dubious proposition, especially with Flott. We'll see how it all shakes out, but I think that we could very well see a situation where the Titans are just really weak in the back end of the defense again, and they wind up getting picked on back there. So, it's this is definitely as I was making comparisons to Saleh's defenses with the Jets that got to be so good. That's kind of where it falls apart. Is that trying to compare Alante Taylor and Cordell Flott to Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. I mean, I think that DJ Reed is clearly better than either one of those players. And then, Sauce Gardner is a difference maker. So we'll see how it all shakes out. I think that the Titans, the AFC South, oddly enough, given the division's history, is suddenly a pretty darn competitive division, in my opinion. I think that Houston, Jacksonville are very clearly moving in the right direction with the additions they've made, and they're already competitive teams. And then we'll see what we get with the Colts, but they were humming before injuries hit last year. So, relatively tough division, it looks like. And, I think that this is really a situation where the Titans just need to keep building year after year, and hopefully you make positive progress this year. But at the same time, they picked first overall a year ago. They, made the fourth overall selection in this year's draft. And we'll talk about this with a couple other teams in this grouping. You just don't have good roster talent if that's happening multiple years in a row, right? Like you have the occasional team that gets way too injured and drops to the bottom and then makes their way back out. But if you're consistently picking in not just the top 10, but the top 5, like obviously your roster talent is pretty deficient. So we'll see what Robert Saleh and Brian Dable do here. I don't have like some overwhelming level of confidence in either one of them in their roles. I do think Saleh has been a pretty good defensive coordinator, has a track record of that with some different sets of players. Dable obviously was good at running an offense with Josh Allen. We'll see what he does here. So that's the Titans. I think it's very open ended here, but at the same time, as I say, you've got the quarterback, right, and so much can fall into place around that. So I am looking forward to seeing what the Titans put together here, and we'll see how it all shakes out for them. So. All right, call it there with the Titans for now, and I'll get to division previews, full projections, everything like that as we get into the summer here, and I get the model running. But just doing, as I mentioned, this is my process. So roll through and get an outline of where all these teams are at heading into the season. So let's flip over, and I'll go from the Tennessee Titans to the Las Vegas Raiders here, because this is a pretty easy transition. Instead of the first overall pick from last year's draft, we're getting the first overall pick from this year's draft in Fernando Mendoza. So the Raiders, of course, add Mendoza with the first overall pick. It really resets the franchise, and in terms of where the franchise is at in terms of numbers, we got about $26 million in cap space for the upcoming year. Raiders have $100 million in cap space for 2027 and $280 million in cap space for 2028 with the current projections. They also have all of their draft picks in place for the next 2 years. We've got John Spytek running things as a general manager there, I guess in part with a minority owner, Tom Brady. And then we got Clint Kubiak from the Seattle Seahawks, and of course the Kubiak family of lore heading things up as the head coach after a Super Bowl winning season out there in Seattle. He's got Andrew Janico with him as his offensive coordinator, but this will be Kubiak's offense. Rob Leonard was promoted from the defensive line coach of the Raiders to be the defensive coordinator. We'll touch on that with the defense. And then we got Joe DeCamillis in its special teams. So I think that, looking at the state of the team, as I noted in my article, like this is a year after they went with the safe option of bringing in Pete Carroll to establish a higher floor along with veteran quarterback Geno Smith. That did not work at all. blew up as catastrophically as it could have. And it was really looking at the roster and looking at the season as a whole for the Raiders. It's just so disappointing because I mean, it's hard for me to really point to anybody and say that they developed this player during that year or this player's prospects look better than they did entering the season a year ago. I mean, we can go across the board there. We'll hit some of the individuals, but really, really tough year. So I think that we got a fresh start. We'll call this the fresh start of the John Spytek, Tom Brady era, I guess we could say. And hopefully, yeah, it's just a better process than it was last time, where you just had all this stuff going on with these rumors coming out after the fact with the coaching design of the coaching staff, and maybe the front office and ownership having too much of a hand in exactly what that coaching staff looked like, instead of hiring Pete Carroll and letting him do his thing. Flip side of that is Pete Carroll's son was the offensive line coach, which went terribly. So hard to say he didn't have any say, right? But yeah, I think it's just all that added up to them having the number 1 overall pick, and of course they get Mendoza. So we'll get a restart here. Much like the Titans, the Raiders are not in a good situation roster talent wise, right? Like, they picked Ashton Genty, 6th overall a year ago, and then I think Bowers was just outside the top 10 a year before, and now they're picking 1st overall. So again, not quite back-to-back top 5 picks, but pretty darn close, and we can make some assumptions about the overall roster talent from there. Yeah, let's see. I guess that getting into it, let's jump into the offense, and then we can talk about Max Crosby trade and him returning as part of the defense. So looking at this offense, I mean, it's I guess that the first thing I'd say is that I think it's a really good idea to bring Kirk Cousins in as a veteran quarterback to get this rolling. There's just the fact with Mendoza, he clearly has great physical traits and went number 1 overall for a reason. But I also, don't think that guys like Kurt Warner and Dan Orlovsky, just turn on guys' film and before they start watching it have predetermined that they're going to have an opinion on guys. Obviously there's biases out there and people have their own way of doing things. But just speaking as somebody who does study a lot of film, I just don't have the energy to do that. I it's enough to lock in and just see what the players tell me on the film through my interpretation and go with that. Like, I don't have any personal feelings really about any of these guys. Don't know them. They're images on the screen. So all that to say, when guys like Kurt Warner, Dan Orlovsky are pointing out that Mendoza in Indiana's offense was throwing a lot of stuff to the sidelines, a lot of RPOs where he knows immediately he's throwing a back shoulder or a vertical, his feet are already set there, versus having to work through his progression, work over the middle of the field. This isn't to say that Mendoza can't do those things. It's just pointing out that he didn't do a lot of it in Indiana's offense, according to some really good quarterback minds. And that's going to be a process to work through that and work through the trust and timing that it takes to really operate an NFL passing game over the middle. So, that could take a little bit of time for him. And I think that having Kirk Cousins in place to, bridge the gap, given, Cousins played, I think we can call it winning football down the stretch for the Falcons last year. I think that's a really good setup. Mendoza seems like a really mature young man, but at the same time, getting to be in a building with a guy like Kirk Cousins, who his process is as good as anybody's, right? Like, in terms of his day to day, is, what he's doing around the calendar year to be an NFL quarterback. I think he's as good an example as you could get in terms of how you should be running things day to day. So I think that'll help them a lot. Now, around them, there just isn't a lot of talent on this offense right now. We mentioned Brock Bowers and Ashton Genty being recent top picks. I think those are really good players. Unfortunately, Bowers is coming off another year where he dealt with a bunch of injuries, and that's after his last year at Georgia. He had the different injuries, and I believe it was the ankle that was plaguing him through the draft process, which is probably why he's in a Raiders uniform at all. He might have gone higher if it weren't for that. So hopefully Bowers is healthy again this year. I think that Genty, definitely showed enough to me. Really rough situation. He finishes with 3.7 yards per carry. Not a good number, of course. But at the same time, we saw Ashton Genty has long speed. We saw that on his, what was it, like week 3 that he took that long, I think 64-yarder to the house. I think he runs with physicality. I think he shows some vision. I think if you drop him into the right setup, Ashton Genty is a guy who can definitely help you. So I'm excited. Well, I would be excited if to see him in a really good offense. Unfortunately, I don't think this is that. Now, those are two players I'm high on. Other guys, Colton Miller, I think is a set it and forget it left tackle when he's healthy. Now, Colton Miller only played 4 games last year, missed the rest of it with an ankle injury. That said, he's, I think, 30 entering his age 31 season. Might be off by a year there, but general range. He has been consistently available for most of his career. He missed a little bit of time 2 years ago, but overall, I mean, guy's been in the league for like 8, 9 years and he's played most of the games. So I think it's totally reasonable to expect Colton Miller to be back and at his usual, I'd say above average, certainly not like elite all pro, but definitely above average. Happy to have him at left tackle. He should be back. Tyler Linderbaum is going to be slotting in at center, and he is making a boatload to get to play there. And yeah, as we mentioned, with the cap the way it is, there's so much money out there and so few free agents that this scenario is what you're going to wind up with, where Linderbaum got a 50% bump over Creed Humphrey's contract to set the top of the center market, and Linderbaum, for Raiders fans not familiar with him, super mobile, super mobile. That's what's going to stand out about him: his ability to pull in the run game. He just can get all over the place. Now, he, at the same time, he's not like the most overwhelmingly strong guy at the point of attack. So he is the highest paid center in football right now. I don't know how many people would say that he's the best. I would go with Creed Humphrey pretty definitively there. So we'll see how his contract gets adjusted moving forward. But Tyler Linderbaum definitely, I think, gives you a plus starter on that offensive line. Now, this is where we start to run into real trouble, is once we get past those two names. So as of now, the starting five, it looks like Spencer Burford would be the left guard, Austin Powers Jackson would be the right guard, and then DJ Glaze would be the right tackle. And hang on, I missed the name on Powers Johnson. I looked that up in the background, make sure I'm not talking nonsense here. But yeah, Jackson Powers Johnson. So I don't know